Welcome to my negative painting poinsettia transparent watercolor tutorial. This is a narrated step-by-step video at normal speed. It's the companion video to my demonstration video of the same painting, which is set to music at 3x speed, so you can watch the complete evolution of the painting uninterrupted. This is my second series of a holiday poinsettia, however this one incorporates more negative painting. The photo on the right was my reference and inspiration for this painting. I made the decision before I begin my painting to protect some of the highlights on the paper, so I've already applied masking fluid in the areas that I want to preserve the white of the paper so that I can remove it later on and showing some of the pure white of the paper as highlights. Here I've started to apply a very loose wash. It's a mixture of Pyrrole Red with quinacridone Coral and quinacridone Gold and a touch of opera. I'm just liberally applying this wash in various areas of the composition, and then I'm going to soften the edges with a very fine mist spray bottle. I'm going to come in and soften some of this and diffuse some of this color as I progress. As I apply this wash, I'm not very specific with the application and where I'm putting it. It's on positive and negative space, it's on the petals, it's in the background, and as I start to build this composition, it'll all start to come together, and this base wash will help tie the composition together. And here I'm using the fine mist spray bottle to soften some of those edges and diffuse some of that color across the page. You can see this is a very generous wash, and it covers a large area of the paper, and there's a lot of gradation of color from one into the other. These are subtle color changes. There's some cool reds in there and reddish pinks, and some warmer red tones in there, especially in the area where I've mixed in some of the quinacridone Gold. So here I'm going to take a spray bottle. It's got a coarser spray than the fine mist one that I use, and I'm going to use that to get a little bit of texture and discoloration into my wash. So as I've spritzed this water on top of this, which is still mildly wet, I get a kind of a textural quality that comes through, and I like the effect of it on the poinsettia flower petals. Now I'm coming in with a darker valued wash and a smaller brush, and I'm being more deliberate with the application. And at this point in my process, I'm working in negative space, so I'm painting around the exterior edge of some of these petals, and that's going to help send the background further back, and it's going to help bring the petals forward. The way I think about it when I'm painting is I'm either working on an interior or an exterior edge of a shape. And when I'm working around the exterior edge of a shape, I feel that I'm working in negative space. When I'm working on the interior edge of a shape, I feel I'm working on a positive shape. So these values that I'm putting in here right now, these dark tones that are some of these darker valued shapes, are I'm painting the area between the exterior edges of these petals, so I'm working in negative space. And again, I'm applying the darker value there to help bring the petals forward and send the background further back and bring more depth to my painting and to my composition. As I work around the exterior edge of these shapes and work in a negative space, I don't simply outline the complete shape at any point in the composition. I try not to. So I don't just take a darker value and completely outline a flower petal. I let it gradate out, I put breaks in it, and I leave some of it for the viewer to complete. So I don't tell the whole story. I just give indications and suggestions that there's the continuation of, say, a flower petal. But I don't want to just do 360-degree circles around every shape. It just doesn't look natural, and it's not near as interesting. Here I'm using a darker value to suggest some darker petal shapes, and these help create some depth to the composition and building layers of these petals. So I have light over dark, dark over light, and dark going behind the light shapes, which helps send the light shapes forward, and they help add to this feeling of lost and found edges where the whole story isn't told, and you just have broken value shapes that suggest that there's a petal there, but it's not completely described. Here I'm applying a dark value in negative space, and I'm breaking the shape up, and it gives a suggestion of stems in the background because I've broken this shape up. And by breaking these shapes up and putting them in the smaller shapes, you can see how it gives a suggestion that there's a stem or a linear shape there in the background. Here I'm going to apply a gradated tone here on the outer edge of this petal shape. It's going to send it forward, and it's going to take the background further back and tie some of this larger area together with this gradated wash. I'm applying these darker valued washes throughout the composition. I'm not just working in one spot. I'm trying to develop the painting as a whole. And as I've applied these washes, as I've developed this painting throughout, I've been using the same colors, but the rose madder quinacridone, I've been using alizarin crimson quinacridone, quinacridone coral, quinacridone gold, a lot of quinacridones because they have pretty good light fastness. But some of these tones are on the cool side, and a few of them are on the warmer side. So I've been varying that as I've applied my washes. And you can see now that I've been working around the composition with some of these gradated washes that the larger flower shape in the top right corner has become more defined and is more of a focal point. Now that I've pushed some of the background back, it starts to take shape and have a form that it wasn't there when everything was the same value. I'm coming in with my darkest values yet, and I'm starting to do some smaller brush work, starting to paint some smaller shapes. My process is often I'll start with a large wash to be a foundation wash for my painting, and I start working the larger shapes first, and I work with my lighter values. So I work with large shapes and light values first, and then as I move along in my painting process, I start to use darker values and start to work on smaller shapes. And along with that, I normally start with larger brushes and work my way down to my smaller brushes. And then sometimes towards the end, I'll come in with a glaze or a wash to tie some of the areas together, and I'll be back to a bigger brush when I do that. I'm working in these smaller, darker valued shapes,
around my composition to develop this whole painting. And I normally start in my focal point with these shapes, as I've done here, and then I start to add similar small dark valued shapes around the composition. But my darkest values and the greatest amount of contrast I normally try to place around my center of interest. While I have a photo that I used for reference and inspiration for this painting, the dark value shapes I'm putting out now are more based on what I feel I need to improve the design of the painting. They're not copying from a photograph. At this point in my process, I'm going to come in with a glaze. As I spoke earlier, one of the later things that I do in my process is sometimes I'll do a glaze to help tie the composition together. And this is a fairly strong red. It's got some alizarin crimson and some quinacridone coral in it. And I'm putting this in negative space behind some of these petals to help them stand out and help tie the background together. And the nice thing about working with transparent watercolor is all the brush strokes and the painting done earlier in my process, it still comes through, even though it's starting to get tied together in larger shapes by this glaze. And the one thing I'll point out is this, the brush I'm using, I really like. It's a silver black velvet. It's a jumbo round small, and it's a nice blend of squirrel and synthetic, and it's very soft and does a nice job applying the wash. I'm also using my very fine mist spray bottle, which helps diffuse this color and gradate it and provides interest to the wash, I feel. I'm adding a few darker petal shapes here to provide a little bit more interest to this area and bring out that center of interest a little bit more. And these petal shapes that I'm putting in right now, they're not necessarily in my reference photo, but they're just shapes that I want to place in here to improve the design of my composition. Here I'm going to suggest another petal shape sticking out from behind the lighter shape. It helps define that petal shape, and then I'm going to come in with a little bit of a wash of the same tone, working around the exterior edge of this petal with a wash to just better define it. And again, you can see that I have lost and found edges working there, and some of the values just merge into values of other shapes, and that's kind of the effect of the lost and the found edge. And now I've reached a point where I've dried everything thoroughly, and I'm going to come in with a pickup eraser and remove the masking fluid that I placed at the beginning of my painting process to leave some of the highlights. As I'm removing my masking fluid here, in the bottom left where my hand is, I really don't like the shape or the lines that I've left there that I masked earlier in my process. It was the petal shape that's there in my reference photo. I really don't like its positioning or the direction of it, and I think I'm probably just going to paint that out with some glazing and putting in some other shapes. I don't like how it works with the rest of the composition. So this is where you focus on design, more on design and less about what your photograph is saying. And I'm just going to suggest some other petal shapes, and I'm going to let the initial shape that I had there just disappear into the background. The wash that I'm going to apply right in this area is going to soften some of these edges, and it's going to, by doing so, it's going to help the focal point, my center of interest, stand out a little bit more. And it does create a nice effect. Here I've applied the wash and diffused the color with the spray, and it really softens those edges, and it creates a darker valued shape that's very soft, but you can still see the shapes coming through that I've painted prior in my process. Again, because we're working with transparent watercolor, you still see all that, even though you've painted out the whites in those areas and put a glaze over top. You see the very delicate layering of paint. I'm back to my smaller brush and smaller shapes and very dark values. So this is where I like to come in and put some finishing touches on my composition. Just strengthen some shapes by putting some very dark valued marks in various areas of my painting. So I hope you can see how this building up of layers, working from the larger shapes to the smaller shapes, with the lighter values to the darker values, I hope you can see how that starts to build depth in the painting. You can see the layers and there's lights over darks and darks over lights, and I want to stress again that even though I was using a photograph, I like to refer to it as an inspiration. I'm not trying to copy a photograph. I'm still trying to make art and do a painting and interpret my reference material, but not copy it. As I come in here and I put this small kind of linear shape, you can see how it reinforces the edge of that petal to the left of that shape. And that's what I've done throughout the composition. Put some of these marks and darker values just to help reinforce an edge or a shape or send an area back. And it's just with this value contrast that I could achieve that. I'm applying a cool yellow tone of some aureole and yellow in the center of the flower, and I don't want it just to feel like a bullseye there, so I'm going to take a little bit of that color and put in a few areas of my composition, just so it provides a little bit more togetherness with the whole composition. So I'm not putting a lot, just some touches of this color, so that one spot just doesn't look like a bullseye in my center of interest. And using this spray bottle helps diffuse that color and softens it. And it's not necessarily that I had anything in my photo saying that there's the center of a flower there, but it just gives that suggestion that this is this flowing bundle of poinsettias, and there could be the center of the flowers there. So this is my second holiday poinsettia painting. It has much more negative painting included in the process than my other series, but it's just another approach. I hope you enjoyed this, and thanks for watching.